Okay, so this is my actual review of B.R. Yeager's Negative Space because I almost thought about letting the last review kind of stay and stand as my review on record of this book, but there is a lot I actually want to talk about with this book and that I want to go into because this is one of my favorite books of the year by far. And and I want to talk about it sort of outside of the usual review pattern that I've been doing with the breakdowns. You saw my results in the last video. It literally was 5 stars across the board. I would give that to every aspect of this book very easily. Is it a perfect book? No. No book is really perfect. But factoring in what I got out of it and that I think is very special, I give it 5 stars very easily. So let's talk a little bit more about it. Now, I do want to give a special mention to content warnings. Be sure to check those with this book. This dives into some pretty brutal stuff. In particular, self unaliving is a main focal point of this book, and I will be talking about it in this review. Just pick up this book and flip through it. You'll see that there are these different section headers in every chapter. These are the different narrators that tell the story from their different points of view. And this technique here is vital, I think, to the book's success. It's not a gimmick. It really does open up the story to multiple points of view. And the great thing about that is you can see between the characters how similar in some ways their experiences are, how different they are. Amir, Lou, and Jill are three main characters, at least the three main narrators. And they are all kind of pulled into the orbit of another young man named Tyler. And it's really interesting kind of getting their perspective. Amir and Tyler are friends, but they're more than friends. Jill and Tyler are boyfriend and girlfriend, and Lou and Jill are best friends. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in this book that just it's hooks in me right away. There were some things around Lou's identity, which was really interesting. There's different spellings of his or her name. She or he is referenced by different pronouns depending on who's talking about her. And there's a reason for that. That's really intriguing and interesting. But early on, I was just like fascinated by that. Like, where is this going? And a little scared, to be honest. One of the things I did not expect from this book that was a beautiful surprise is just how queer it was. I didn't do a lot of research into this book. This was really brought to my attention originally by Colin, and I was just absolutely fascinated by it. I read the description of the book on the website, and that's all I read. I didn't look at any reviews, anything like that. Like, I'm going to go into this fresh, and I'm so glad I did. But that also means I was surprised by how much queer rep is in this and how integral to the entire story it is. And I really love that. As far as the actual plot of Negative Space, essentially, this town has a high rate of self unalivings, and most of them are teenagers. And it's beyond just, oh, there's six. I mean, it's an epidemic, but strangely, it's not being treated like that. And you really get a sense, and this is what I love about this book so much. You get a sense of sort of that generational despair, and I think multiple generations feel like they own that, sort of, staring into the abyss, essentially, of a future that's uncertain at best. And if you talk about some of the certainties, they are unpleasant and apocalyptic. And I think a lot of different generations have felt that. I mean, I know I feel that. I think, as you go down the line, the different generations coming up, that's going to be more and more present. And this book really is very bleak. It's very dark, but in a way that, you know, is sort of comforting. This book kind of ended up being a little cathartic for me. This last couple of weeks, I've been struggling, not with depression. I mean, I know what that feels like, but just being kind of down about the state of the world, about the state of everything. Honestly, my publishing efforts, trying to write and get stuff out there, just the general apathy. It feels like that you get sometimes that things are just the way things are. Nothing can change, and we're just sort of on the slow march toward oblivion. So, yeah, so that's been fun. But reading this book, I think it made me feel a certain amount of comfort in that I'm certainly not alone. And and I mean, I knew that intellectually, but I think going through the process of this with these characters, this book, in a weird way, like early on, it kind of reminded me of Euphoria, except if it was a sort of cosmic existential horror. I think in some ways, Euphoria, you could probably read it as that way too. The feeling of just a world where human life means so little. Because I think that's something that I have struggled with myself during the pandemic, and the number of people who passed away, and the sort of strange feeling of all of that trauma and all of that unaliving feeling, like just a little bump in the road for everybody else in life, just kind of going on. Beyond all that, this is just really well written and judged. These characters you come to know and understand, even when you don't like them very much, or they don't like themselves very much, or they do things that are hurtful to other characters. It's easy to kind of understand in some ways why they do the things they do, even when they're sort of inexplicable. And a lot of this book is very subtle, which I love. I love subtlety in writing. Like, there is something to be said for kind of bonking you over the head with an idea. I don't mind that, but it is one of the things that sometimes leads me away from things like YA, because things can be very upfront, and I just prefer, when I'm going to read a book versus like watching a TV show or a movie, I like subtlety. I like being able to connect the dots together for myself. A lot of this book hinges on a substance called whirl that is legal, and is basically seems to be packets of dried fungi of some kind, that people inhale and smoke and do various things with, that create these visions, these dark visions where everything is connected in a horrific way. I don't want to go too much into spoiler territory, because I do want you to experience this on your own if you're interested in it. But it's important to kind of understand, I think, the way that this book operates. It's not big on explanation. You see cause and effect, and that is sort of blurred. There's a lot of dream sequences, and that's one thing I will say, probably towards the last third of the book, I was getting a little impatient with it, because there is a lot of repetition. But the repetition, by the time you get to the end of it, I did understand the idea behind it and why it was happening. To kind of get you into the sense of ritual. And I feel like it almost had a sort of hypnotic effect on the reader in a way, because we kind of started going over some of the same territory, but in slightly different, evolving ways. And I really came to appreciate that. So even though I was in the middle of it, I was like, okay, do I need to read, this other sort of strange dream sequence where they're in a strange place doing something strange? But it all made sense by the end, and I felt like the time put into reading that and sort of experiencing it with them helped emphasize the passage of time within the book, but also really kind of just getting your head into that state. This book is one of the few books that I've read, and I would count House of Leaves among them, that if you let it get its hooks into you, if you really go with it can do things to your brain. It can actually sort of affect you. And I thought that was a very positive experience. I love that feeling when a book kind of reaches out beyond the page and sort of plays with your mind a little bit. And that definitely is what this book achieved. I enjoy that feeling. I thought that was very effective. Also, this is the sort of book, or really the sort of creative thing, I put it a little more generally, where it really, I find it very inspiring and very energizing. There are certain pieces of media that do that for me. I don't know if other people have that experience, especially if you're a creative person yourself. Just certain things I have found very energizing. Like, when I take them in, I want to create more. So, Negative Space by B.R. Yeager. I love this book. Definitely 5 stars. In my top 5 for sure of the year, if not my top pick. I need a little more time to think about that, because it does operate in sort of a different way than other books, I think, within my head, certainly. And I'm excited to read more by this author.